Welcome everyone to an awesome little video from Twisted Dice. I'm Darren and today I'm being joined by Andrew, who is also the team captain for Twisted Dice for our tournament scene.
Hey everyone, pretty excited I have to say with the ninth edition rules that have now sat in front of me on my phone. So this is I've
It's
been waiting for
Christmas
this for
Day,
ages.
Andy.
It is like Christmas Day. Yeah,
It
tell you
is
my girlfriend, she was mocking me earlier for how excited I was about this. So yeah.
not kind of how my missus reacted.
Oh really? Yeah. Well, I definitely get mocked for the Warhammer stuff, but no, it's fine. It's good. It's understood.
It looks like we've got some interesting games coming up very, very
Yeah.
soon. Of course, abiding by all the social distancing rules and measures that's taken into place. So that's going to make recording very, 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 very interesting. I'm just praying that the weather's good and we can record outside. If not, we'll have to think about it. But we're not here to talk about that. We're talking about something really, really interesting, really, really cool that Games Workshop has just dropped on our laps, like literally today, a few hours ago. It's big, it's massive, it's ninth, and it's free.
And it is, yeah. We've got the full rules pack here, all 26 pages of it,
And that's awesome. That is absolutely awesome.
which is so good. And I think that for me, like I think I said to you earlier, for me we've gone from what we tried to do is kind of remove the gamey and enhance the game. That's if I was GW and I was looking for a tagline, that's what it feels like to me. It feels like these rules here have been designed in a way to help block some of the weirdness that's happened in eighth, some of the way that we've played rules, and it's funny because I think people sort of would think of it as a skill, the way that eighth rules worked, but actually you either knew them or you didn't.
Yes.
So you could take advantage of them or you couldn't, and someone would take advantage of a rule that you weren't aware of, and it would feel bad. It would feel bad because there was that degree of interpretation, I think, with certain rules. And the way that we were using them and various different things. So I really look at this rule set and think it's a really well sorted rule set. There's not much in here that I think leads to questions. There's a couple of little bits where I think there's a smite question that we'll get to, and there's also some interesting interaction of rules in regards to armor saves that I think are worth a look.
Which is blowing the internet up at the
Yeah,
moment.
if you can get to a 2+ armor save, like if you've got a natural 2+ armor save, and you can find a way of improving that by 1, there is a potential loophole here that sees you on a 2-up invuln, but we'll see. I think that'll get sorted out. It works that way in Sigmar, but in Sigmar it's a bit more of a niche kind of situation. Whereas in there's a number of units out there, aren't there, with 2-up saves that can become very powerful. Terminators, Custodes, Terminators, Drago. There's often powerful units that can have this kind of rule.
Yeah,
But yeah, I mean the rules are really well set up. It starts by just talking about basic rules, establishing keywords, those sort of things. But I think really, like on page 4 is where it starts to get interesting straight off the bat. With some, and again, I think what we'll probably do today is focus on either clarifications that have been put in place from 8th into 9th, or where there are big differences. And of course, the first one here is really about unit coherency, which we're going to talk about in more detail later when we get to the morale phase. But it just talks about the fact that there are now 2 different sets of coherency rules for small squads and for large squads. And again, this was all previewed on the community page, which is great. But basically, to be in coherency, then all models need to be within 2 inches horizontally and 5 inches vertically of at least one other model for their unit, and that's for squads of 5 or less.
That's cool.
So for those smaller squads, once you move into the bigger squads, then it says 6 or more models. Then all models must be within 2 inches horizontally and 5 inches vertically of 2 models. So you can imagine that if effectively you kind of want to move in 2 ranks to be safest.
Yeah.
There are people who have proposed the sort of what I call the bow tie formation, which is a line with 3 in a triangle at each end, which does create everybody being within 2 of 2 other models. But the problem comes if you then lose 1 model from that unit. The whole of the rest of the unit's out of coherency, and as we'll discover later on, if at the end of your turn a model is out of coherency, you have to remove models from that unit until you're in coherency. So if you've got a long stream of these, you basically have to keep removing them until there's 5 of them, because that's the first point where you're back at coherency. I was chatting to Simon Priddis the other day. He came up with quite a nice design with a sort of 1 and 2, and that would work quite well. But actually, I think one of the things I feel is that if I've got a 10-man guard squad as a screen, I'm happy to lose 5 of them because they're still an effective screen at 5. So my opponent still has to do work on them. Where it really hurts are really, really big squads, and we'll talk about that later when we talk about combat and that kind of thing. So that's a big thing that happens. And the other thing that happens is this definition of what's called engagement range, which is a term that we've not really seen sort of used in the same way before. And again, this engagement range is basically a sort of threat zone around a model. In fact, if you play some like more historical games, units tend to have a sort of defined threat zone based on the nature of the unit, and they've brought that into 40k. So you have a 1-inch horizontal and 5-inch vertical sort of bubble around you that is your engagement range, and you can't set up in engagement range. You can't finish a move in engagement range unless it's a charge move, all the usual stuff that we are used to. But effectively, we've got that 1 inch that we've been used to in 9th, but we've also got 5 inches vertically. So effectively, if you were stood on the first floor of a ruin, someone could stand underneath you and hit you, which is a change.
That's a great change. So,
which is, I think it's a really good change.
So at the beginning, we've got a new phase brought into this.
We have, yeah. There's one other thing we should probably just mention before we get there, and that is that there is a little summary on what are called dice in here, where they talked a bit about dice behaviour, and that includes, for example, the order in which you do modifiers. So it used to be that let's say you had a Thunderhammer Terminator, for example, or a captain, and he had, in fact, let's go with the captain because there's been someone's cast Might of Heroes on him and he's got +1 strength. Then actually that Thunderhammer would hit at strength 10.
Yes.
Because you would add 1 and then multiply. Now you divide, then you multiply, then you add, then you subtract. So actually you'd have your strength of 4 multiplied by 2 for 8 +1 for 9. So you lose a bit of effective strength because of this order of dice. There's a few other things that are quite interesting in here to do with rounding up. So they've actually confirmed that you round up if you end up with a fractional value. They also say that a dice cannot be modified above its maximum possible value, and it cannot be modified below 1. So if you're, and this becomes interesting when we get to the shooting phase and the way that actual modification works. I think a lot of people, and actually, I need to check the actual wording of 8th rules, but a lot of people think of, if I've got a 3-up armor and I get hit with something -3, then I've got 6-up armor. You don't. You have 3-up armor, but you modify your saving throw by 3. And the reason that's important is that it means that you can only ever be modified down to a 1. And it is possible to get a 1-up save. So at that point, under the current wording of the rules, then as long as it's an unmodified 1, so if you've used modifiers to pull your save down to a 1 and you have a modified save of 1+, there is a strong argument, rules as written, that you have met that requirement. So if somebody shoots at your model with a las cannon, you roll a 2, then your save gets modified down to a 1, and if you have a 1-up save, you've made that save. That's an argument. If you roll a 1, you're dead, or well, you're taking damage from that weapon. And this we'll come back to this when we look at the shooting phase, because it does just explain that. In there's also some clarification on rerolls, where it says rerolls are applied before modifiers, if any. So again, you're now doing your rerolls based on, so if you hit on a 3 and you roll a 2 and you've got rerolls, you reroll the 1s and 2s, and then the modifier kicks in. So that's a good clarification around rerolls.
Yes.
So yeah, there's not much of any interest there now, sort of, or any consequence, I would say. There's some stuff about starting strength, half strength, and destroyed units, which becomes important because you need to know the starting strength, because once you've dropped below half of that, there is an implication later on. So they're just defining these key terms in here, which I think is important. There's some information around data sheets, just explaining what the data sheet looks like, what's going on there. There's then, it reaffirms the modification of characteristics that we've already looked at. It talks about random characteristics needing rolling each time. So if you move a guard squad, you have to roll the advance roll each time. So just tidy up, stuff that we've already known, but it does.
Yeah, sure.
It does just to clarify those things. Then we move into the battle round, as you were saying earlier, Darren, and we've got this command phase, movement phase, psychic phase, shooting phase, charge phase, fight phase, morale phase. And so obviously we've all seen that we now have this command phase. And I think there's been some intrigue about what the command phase actually is all about.
Yes.
And it's a little cryptic. Well, it's not cryptic. It's just it's a little open in here as to what happens. So it says we have a Battleforged CP bonus. So we gain 1 CP if our army is Battleforged. So that's great. We know we've got 5 turns now. So we know we start with 12. We're losing CP for detachments. Again, that's all been confirmed through the
so that's nothing new.
The community page. There's nothing new there, but we gain this 1 CP. We resolve any rules that occur in the command phase. And again, like for those of you sort of who are watching this almost straight away, yesterday there was the Thousand Suns faction focus, and it talked about a sort of psychic test that you can do in this phase, in this command phase, where effectively if it's on a 4-up that you pass it, and it can still be denied, but you've got this 4-up test, and if you're within 18 inches of a character, that then allows you to effectively raid the mind of a character and win victory points on a secondary.
Yay!
So I think we can tell from this that this command phase is going to be somewhere where if you've got kind of progressive secondaries, there'll be some kind of action. And again, we've seen the word action referred to in the Games Workshop streams. We've seen it referred to on the community channel, this sense of an action. So this is when these actions are going to take place. And we know, again, from the Thousand Suns, that by undertaking that action, it kind of shuts down that unit that does that action for the turn. So
yes.
If the action is to engineer, which came up with the very first mission that they released, and we've got that one mission that we've seen, and we know that kind of idea of engineering was sort of talked about. So that would be an action that a unit would do, and that's all they can do. So they don't have aura buffs, anything like that, potentially in that command phase. So it's quite an interesting one, I think. And the other interesting thing that we know from that mission that was released is that that's when you score your points for being on objectives.
And that's an interesting thing.
Yeah, and we know historically with GW missions that they tend to pull the game into the middle of the table.
Yeah.
They tend to look for engagement. We know we've got a smaller table. We know we've got smaller armies. All of this stuff has all been out there. We know where the objectives are in the mission they've already announced. And we can see that this game is going to be about holding objectives because, again, you score in your command phase, which means you move on to the objective and you score the turn afterwards. So you have to survive your entire opponent's turn, whilst at the same time you need to be able to threaten their objectives. So movement becomes important, survivability becomes important, and also I think what becomes really important is screening. We need to be able to screen, which we'll come into later on when we start looking at these kind of ideas around what's happening with morale and the other tests that we do around coherency. So these are all tools, and I wonder whether we're in a sort of status now where we're looking at, do I build an army to blow my opponent off objectives, or do I build an army to take objectives, or do I try and do a bit of both? And it's funny, people have been saying, shooting's going to be king, combat's going to be king. Well, who knows? We'll find out.
I was going to say, I don't think people really know at this present time.
No, and terrain's going to be huge. We've heard, haven't we, that terrain has keywords.
Ooh.
And we've also heard that terrain has multiple keywords.
Just talking about terrain, have you seen the new Necron one?
Oh, isn't it amazing?
Oh.
It is so amazing looking. I can't wait to see what it does. I'm really hoping that it teleports people around the board. And
No, we don't want that.
You don't. Oh, I love the idea of it. I love the idea of it.
No.
I've always wanted obelisks and stuff to be, because they've got that big teleporty chamber thing in the bottom.
Yeah, we don't want that.
It doesn't do anything.
We don't want
that.
To
do something.
We don't want to do that. All I want is lightning firing out of it.
Oh yeah, lightning firing out of it would be good. Yeah. Well, and you know what? Anything that keeps Franco happy is good for me. He's our resident Necron expert, so he will love that.
As long as he plays his Necrons like his Nurgle, like his Nurgle,
not like his Thousand Suns.
Suns.
Yeah.
And if you
Yeah,
don't know what we're
used to,
talking about, check the battle report out between
Yeah.
him and Sean. Sean's on top form, very funny as always. And of course, Franco's very, very there, and he gives it all the good in that he's a really good Thousand Sons player. I'll let the battle report talk for itself.
Yeah. And you know what? A good battle report's a good battle report. So even though we're moving into ninth, totally worth watching. It's a really good one.
Definitely.
Yeah. But yeah, so that's the command phase. So the command phase, and then you progress into the movement phase. So the command phase is where we do our scoring, and I suspect where secondary activity takes place based on that community page release, which was right at the very beginning of this sort of process, which has basically been going on since lockdown, hasn't it? We've been getting this detail like bit by bit over the last kind of 100 days or so. It feels like, and well, it was the first few weeks. I remember there was a few sort of GW announcements. We're like, okay, yeah, no, that's good, but it's not quite the excitement that we wanted. And just at the point when you think, oh, maybe it's not going to be that exciting, bang, there it was. You know, ninth. This is what's coming, and it's been great. So so yeah, but this command phase is the new phase.
I'm waiting for the 13th.
Yeah. So, movement phase. Movement phase looks very much like the movement phase has always looked. There are a few things that they've defined. So
Sure.
define normal, move, advance, remain stationary has actually been defined.
Okay,
So,
that's interesting.
So it means now there's no question when you read on an aggressor stat line that should it remain stationary that it double fires. We know that if something is infiltrating using the rules that have been announced on the community page around spending CP and infiltrating onto a board edge in turn 2, that if you arrive on the board edge, you are not stationary, so you're shooting once. Now, there are some people that can get around that. Salamanders have the ability to as long as they didn't advance to be considered stationary, which is exciting.
We don't know anyone that wants to be a Salamander's army at the moment, do we, Andy?
Oh, yeah, well, I love my Salamanders, and we've just been talking about Turp saves, but anyway, so yeah, we'll have to see what happens there. But yeah, remaining stationary is a thing. Falling back is a defined term again. So a unit that falls back as now can't charge, cannot shoot, cannot manifest psychic powers. That's new.
That is
so
new.
Now, if you've got like a Chaos Sorcerer who's, in danger of dying in combat that turn, if you want to keep them alive by pulling them out of combat, because or a Librarian, we know they don't have an invuln. It's hard to keep a Librarian alive. If you pull them out of combat, they're not doing anything. So it then becomes do I leave them in, risk losing them, and try and smite my way out of trouble, or it adds a new dimension.
What about warp
a Demon
time?
Prince, you kind of want them in combat, so it's like, well, they can stay in combat. But
yeah, in there, like warp time or something like that, where you can move again.
Yeah, it would be interesting to see how warp time works with that as a fallback thing.
Because you could be quite really cheeky, cast all your psychic spells, right, in combat, and then just go, warp time, whoop.
And then warp time out of combat, yeah. And I think you can warp time out of combat, but you can't advance as part of the move. I think that's how that works. I don't play Chaos, so but I think that's how that works. I think you can.
I've been more Orcs, Gene Stealer Cult, and everything other than my first faction.
Absolutely. So yeah, it's we'll see how that works. But that's the most interesting thing, I think, in that section. There is some talk around reinforcements and how reinforcements work. Reinforcements being the end of the movement phase, so it's still in the same place it's always been. But I think everyone's expecting to see some kind of formalization of those rules in the match play rules, because we've already seen through the community page that I mean, it wouldn't surprise me if GW have it so that, I mean, it's already that way. If you play open play, you can deep strike on turn 1. Not deep striking on turn 1 is a matched play rule that started as a beta rule and then got brought into the game. So again, I'm making guesses here, but I would assume that the rule pack we're looking at here is the generic rules for play, and that there will be some extra rules around match play, because, for example, there's no talk here about what board edges you can come in on what turns, but we know they've talked about this on the thread on GW.
Yeah, sure.
So though it's not included in these rules, we know it's coming. They often have these little tabs called advanced rules, and there's a couple of important ones here. There's one about moving over terrain. So it says models can freely move over terrain features that are 1 inch or less in height. So if it's 1 inch tall or lower, you can move through it as if it's not there. If it's taller, you have to climb over it or walk around it. So no more charging through walls.
And that's massive.
Which I think is big. And underneath that, there's then the talk of flying units. Now, flying units, when they charge or they move or advance, they all fall back. They can fall back over other models. But they interact with terrain in the same way as any other unit. So fly does not give you the ability to charge over a wall, which again is consistent with where we are in 8th, which has happened. There's been multiple iterations of the fly rule.
Yeah, and it was quite broken at the beginning, wasn't it?
Yeah, well, I think it was, but there were so many other counters to it, so that it's like everything had to be turned up to 11 to make it viable, So yeah, this works that way. But yeah, they can move over things, and again, you can fly within an inch of a unit as long as you don't finish in its engagement range, to use the proper term. Now that we've got this with this 5 inch of height and 1 inch sort of bubble on the other plane. So that's all that's happening on that bit. There's then some information about transports, talking about embarking. So again, you can embark if you're within. Say the unit needs to be within 3. So that means that every model in the unit needs to be within 3, but not wholly within, to embark into a transport. When you embark out of the transport, you have to embark wholly within 3 inches. So no more you get in the bonus move that we used to get the base width. So I mean, let's go for a scenario that never happened. We've got Terminators getting out of a Land Raider. Those Terminators actually get quite a big boost to their move because they're on a 40mm base. So they're actually moving quite a long way. Like, it's an extra 1.5 inches, isn't it? It's not.
Yeah, and
movement.
I've been caught out with that
on a Terminator with short movement. That's a third of its movement again, more than. It's like that's a big boost to a Terminator. Now you have to disembark wholly within 3, and you can't disembark into another unit's engagement range.
Yes, I suppose
which is consistent with the current rules. It's just that now you've got to stay within.
It's more defined.
3. Yeah, which I think is good. I think it makes sense.
I like it.
All the usual stuff. You can't get out of one transport, get into another. You enter a transport when you finish your move by said transport. So you can move a transport in order to then move into range of that transport to get into it. There's no, the transport can move first, is my understanding of it.
Good.
Yeah, that all makes sense. And again, once you're in a transport, you can't be affected in any way. So you can't engage with the game, and the game can't engage with you. There will be some models that have specific rules that change that. I think there's I can't remember who it's for, but there's one faction I think has the ability to make orders or something from within a transport.
Sure.
Scions thing or something, but I think it's a Scions one. So there will be some extra rules around that, but that's the core rule. And again, just a reminder that you can't get into a transport if the transport is within engagement range of any enemy models. So again, if you want to stop somebody picking up, then tie that vehicle down, and then other things can't get into it, even if they're within 3-inch range of it.
That's good. Again, that's going to be more situational, isn't it?
Yeah, massively situational, that one. Again, if you disembark from a transport, you're counted as having moved. You can still make a move after you've disembarked. So you set up wholly within 3, and then you make your move, and not within engagement range. If you're destroyed, rolls a 1, you're dead. Same rule. Again, we know AdMech from Engine War have got a 0 CP strat. So if you've got a boat full of priests, they can get out of it if it's destroyed and not suffer any losses.
That's a shame.
Yeah, We're also aware that there are, from the community pages, that there are some stratagems around destroyed transports as well that will become clear as we go through it. So then the next page is actually some clarification around aircraft, which is basically just the rules that we've seen. So the aircraft rules were published in quite a lot of detail on the community page, and those rules are here again. So saying that if you are an aircraft and somebody's with engagement range of you, you can move away from that without suffering from the rules for falling back. So you can still shoot. And of course, we know that you can now leave the board and then come back on the next turn, anywhere on the board, not within 9 type sort of thing. It's like a re-deep strike. But of course, you lose a shooting phase by doing that because you've got to move off in your movement phase.
Yeah.
So effectively, but it's a really good opportunity to redeploy. to get out of trouble, or sort of to perhaps even, I mean, I can see a scenario where you have a plane, it does its thing, you get shot, you end up with 1-2 wounds left, so you fly off the board in order to come back on the next turn next to a captain who's giving full rerolls, which then mitigates your wound loss, so you can use it to reposition into some kind of buff.
Have they said where the planes come back in from? Is it always your board edge?
No, my understanding is that when they come back on,
because that would be interesting to see how they re-interact when they're coming back onto the board.
So that's interesting. The aircraft one here in these rules says it's destroyed if it goes off the table, but we've been told through the we were told on the community page that you can fly off and come back on again, but that is not that's not in these rules.
That's interesting.
Isn't that interesting?
Oh, what page is that?
13.
Yeah, let's have a little gander on that, because that's very interesting.
Yeah, that's an interesting one, isn't it? It says, minimum move. Models must move their minimum move in inches. If a model cannot make its minimum move, it's destroyed. Brackets, unless you are using strategic reserves. So perhaps there's a strategic reserves. Maybe you have to pay CP to take them off the board.
Yes.
I guess we'll find out more there. We're speculating there, aren't we?
Yes.
But yeah, that's an interesting one. Yeah, I can't.
Yeah, because it just says
strategic reserves is not a rules thing. It's in the missions, because we know that, again, strategic reserves is dependent on battle size as well, from what they said. So I suspect that we've got a whole new set of rules. So yeah, it says the strategic reserves rule is described in the Warhammer 40,000 core book. It says here, so I'm guessing that there's more to come there.
That's interesting.
Yeah, watch this space for how planes work. From what we've been told, they can leave, but
going by what we see here,
I suspect that's a match play rule, but we don't have those yet. So yeah, let's wait and see. One thing on this page that is worth talking about that I really like here is that whenever a unit moves, when it performs a heroic intervention, piles in or consolidates, it must end that move closer to the closest enemy model. Now, we know that to be true.
Yeah, sure.
So, and even if you don't move, you're considered to have piled in. In all cases, aircraft models are excluded when determining which model is closest, unless the unit making that move can fly. So again, it might be possible. So it means that if you have the fly keyword and you're heroically intervening, like a smash captain, if the plane is closest, you can heroically intervene into it. But also, if you've got something with a fly keyword that's threatening a key asset, you might be able to position said plane in such a way that your opponent can't make your target the closest model, because the plane supersedes it because your heroically intervening model has the fly keyword. It would take a misplay from your opponent, I suspect, for you to get away with that. But it's something worth bearing in mind. Always looking for the fun play. Yes, that's an interesting one. But I do think it's interesting that we ignore aircraft from a nearest model perspective, unless the unit flies, at which point the aircraft then becomes the nearest model. So that's quite interesting. Psychic phase looks much like it always has done, but with some significant differences, I think, depending on the nature of army that you're using. If you're trying to buff multiple units, and or you're let's say you're buffing a unit, then you're moving the unit with another psyker and then rebuffing it with another psyker, and then another psyker goes, where you need to use odd combinations of psykers, that's no longer allowed. Every psyker has to do all of its powers sequentially. So Psyker 1 does all its powers, then Psyker 2 does all their powers, or Psyker 3 does all her powers, whichever Psyker you've got. For some reason, I imagine Greyfax there getting involved with some crazy psychicness. So yeah, we've got all these different.
I can understand why they've done that. Being obviously running tournaments, I've seen it where people will then have like multiple psychers, and it will do, right, I'm going to do this one, then I'm going to do this psychic spell from this guy, and then this guy's going to do that psychic spell, and then they go back to the first one, and then they kind of get confused on who's casted what and
also
what's
it's
got
like
left.
you're saving a smite just to take that one wound.
Yeah.
Or something like that. It means you can't do that anymore. And actually, they've done similar things in shooting as well with the order in which you have to fire weapons, which I think is good. But yeah, so you select a psyker, it manifests all its psychic powers, and then once all your psychers are gone, you go into the shooting phase. You can't cast if you've fallen back, as we mentioned earlier. That's a big one.
Yeah.
All psychers know smite still. Psychic tests still work the same way. You cannot select the same psychic power more than once for battle round unless the power is smite. Now, interestingly, there's nothing to say that you can't cast smite multiple times with a single psyker.
No, but like
which to me does not seem a rule as intended.
No, and that's kind of what we was talking about earlier. That if that was going to be the case, it was we don't expect Games Workshop to have written the rule like that, considering what we know from 8th.
Yeah,
and if you can imagine that,
Thousand Suns, can't you?
Yeah, if that was left in place, like Grey Knights, Thousand Suns would take an advantage of it. They would absolutely clean house, and that's where we don't want to be again. As much as I've got a Thousand Suns army, and it'd be like really, really cool to do that. On a fun side of it, to have a fun game, and it to be more, I need to think about what I'm doing, opposed to, well, my army just trumps, so I win.
Well, yeah, you might be looking at like 12 to 15 smites, mightn't you?
Yeah, and that's
which is a bit gross. So I think we'll assume that you can't do that. But as written at the moment, it looks slightly possible. And Perils of the Warp still seems to work the same way. 6-inch bubble, D3 mortal wounds if you die from that, which again, a lot of players I see miss. They forget that if you die from Perils of the Warp, you create a warp bomb.
Yes. Trust me, I don't let people forget that.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It's a good one to remember. And again, they've formalised the increase of 1 in warp charge for each smite. So there's not really much else to report, but I think not being able to fall back is quite big. And I also think having to do each psyker's full collection of psychic powers in one go is also quite big. Particularly for certain armies. I can imagine Eldar, there's quite a lot of, there's particularly ones that buff. Then you're saving if you have like a targeted smite, you might keep a smite back, use a targeted smite, and then it's creating opportunities to snipe, isn't it? Effectively.
Yes.
So that's gone. So shooting phase. Then we're into the next section here. So this is again works much the same way as the current shooting phase. So I think there's a couple of clarifications in here that I think are good. So first of all, you select targets for all weapons before any attacks are resolved. So again, we have to select all our targets, which is as it's always been.
Yeah.
At least one model in the target unit must be visible to the attacking model and within range of the attacking weapon.
That's interesting.
So, yeah, I mean, it does mean that if all nine intercessors you've got left in the squad can all reach that one model, then the whole squad can still die. But that's what you need to draw. You need to draw. Each model needs to be able to draw line of sight and have range. So it's good that that's just clarified. I've seen some silly arguments over the years around that one. So if a unit targets multiple units, all attacks against one unit must be resolved before resolving attacks against the next. Because again, there were some things you could do with sequencing of shots to perhaps, goad out particular hits on shield drones or whatever it might have been. So again, you have to resolve all of them in one go. Or because perhaps you're trying to make somebody use savior protocols a particular way, or there are scenarios whereby you're sort of trying to control your target priority, whereas now all attacks must go against that one unit must go at the same time. And also, if a unit shoots with multiple weapons, if you've got a squad with, you've got a sister squad with a Condemn the Bolt rifle and 3 melters, the melters all have to shoot at the same time. they might go into different targets, but they have to shoot at the same time, and then the Condemned bolter could fire. So you fire all weapons with the same profile, fire simultaneously. So it's just formalised that, which I think is good.
So can you fire? So can you fire the melters first? Does it specify on which fires first? Like, for instance,
No. You as an attacking player, you decide, you choose. Yeah, but what it gets rid of is that I've got 2 melters and 2 bolters, and I'm going against 3 wound models. So I'll shoot 1 melter. Oh, you've taken 2 wounds. In that case, I'll shoot a bolter. That finishes that one. Now I'll shoot a melter again because I'm back to a 3 wound model. It means you can't do that kind of slow dice, janky rolling to maximise the efficiency of your shooting in terms of dealing wounds. You shoot all your melters, you shoot all your bolters. So if somebody's got 1 wound left, you shoot your bolters first.
Yes.
That's the level of it now. You can't do it per gun. And actually, it'd be interesting to read through. I've never actually looked where people play it that way, but I don't actually know if that definition was in previously. It talks about being locked in combat and saying that if you're in engagement range, you can't shoot.
I think previously what it says about speed rolling. So if you're going to fire like the same gun, you would roll all the dice at the same time.
At the same time, yeah. Which is again where all this kind of comes from.
Yeah.
So there's again it says if you're locked in combat, you can't shoot or be shot. The big guns never tire rule is mentioned here as well, which is around basically being able to shoot into combat. So if you've got a monster or a vehicle and you're within engagement range, you can shoot weapons into those models that are in engagement range with you at -1 to hit. You can't, however, shoot blast weapons.
That's it.
But it does mean if you shoot, or let's say you've got a Lehman Russ with 3 heavy bolters, so you've got 9 shots, and it's a tank commander, and it's a Vostroyan tank commander, you spent a CP to hit on 2s, so all of your heavy bolter shots go into the stuff you're engagement with, hitting on 3s, -1 to hit. If you kill everything, then you could have nominated your battle cannon, which we're assuming is a blast weapon because it's a D6 shot weapon. Your battle cannon could then shoot. If one of the unit that was tagging you survives, you can't shoot your blast weapon. So you would shoot the blast weapon last, and you try and kill everything in engagement range. So again, you may even, there may even be a scenario where you actually choose in your opponent's turn, if you've got 2 tank commanders, to heroically intervene into the squad that's wrapping you to double your chance of killing the chaff.
Yes.
In order to then fire your blast weapon, which would be mad, but there's some things that you could do that would be interesting. Though again, I mean, I'm assuming things like wyverns will be blast weapons, because that they would have in 7th they would have had a blast marker.
Yes.
So basically anything that had a template, we're assuming is a blast weapon. I believe that there is a list coming that will be published. I guess that'd be in the points document. I'm not sure. So we've got monsters and vehicles. They can do this. They can do the shooting into combat. And then also the lookout sir rule is also covered here, which again has been on the community page. And that means if you're a character, if you're within 3 inches of a vehicle or a monster, you can't be targeted.
This is the one I like.
Which I like. There was a load of, I remember at the time the rule was out, they showed a character stood next to a demon prince or something going, no, you can't target either. And well, actually you can, because one of them is going to be closest. If you're positioned, unless you are equidistant, it's very situational to get out of that situation. The other thing is if you're near a squad with at least 3 models. So if you're within 3 inches of a squad with at least 3 models, again, your character can't be targeted. But what we've moved away from is that really annoying thing where you're 20 inches from Araman and you want to shoot him, but because behind you in the corner of your deployment zone, sat in a ruin somewhere, there's a little nurgling gently chuckling away, 19 inches away, you can't shoot Araman.
See, this is all about chaos, you see.
Yeah, well, I chose chaos because nurglings are like the archetypical,
Yeah.
That's what nurglings are so amazing at doing. They're so amazing at giving character screening.
See, I was thinking upon this and thinking, like, tactically now, if you come up against a person that relied upon that scenario, for instance. So, like, for instance, I was thinking a game with John, for instance, where he had all the all the demons forward, but his sorcerers were further back, Now
Was that
because
when he
they
was
were,
playing the vessel list back
yeah,
in
so then
back in the height of that? Yeah,
that's it. So then when he was 3 inches away, that meant that I could target him. Or if he just had that small squad in front of him, I know all I've got to do is target that small squad,
target that small squad,
kill that, and then
Yeah.
I can then go straight for the throat.
which is where you might see, you know, Death Shroud Terminators, things like that are really tanky, becoming screening units. I mean, Plague Bearers are still really tanky. It's just that you will see later on that you now can't do what people have always done and have 30 Plague Bearers
Yes.
holding 4 objectives. If you do that, there's every chance that your 30 Plague Bearers becomes 5 Plague Bearers if you lose 1 Plague Bearer.
It's a shame.
So that game is done. That game is done.
It's a big shame because like I feel that Horde does still have a place.
Yeah, but I think you've got to hoard in a different way now. So if you're going to hoard in tens. Bring 80, 90 guardsmen if you really want to, if that's a way you want to play. But bring them in tens. Don't bring them in 30s. I think that's what GW are aiming for here. The punishment for being a squad of 10 is not that severe, because if somebody wants to kill you, they can.
Yeah.
But the penalty for being a bigger squad is not good.
No.
But yeah, we'll get back to that. So anyway, attacks, that you know, all of that stuff, number of attacks, it's all same old. There's some description of ranged weapon types. It talks about blast weapons here. So again, for anyone who's not seen it on the community page, you've got a minimum of 3 attacks for a blast weapon that's got 6 or more models in the squad. But you get maximum attacks if there's 11 or more models.
Sure.
So again, you can see that GW are not trying to stop you from having squads of 10. What they're trying to discourage is really big flops.
Horse, sure.
Because we know actually that I found the games that are hardest to finish are the games where you've got Horde that are combat heavy. So Orcs is a lot of dice. It's a lot of dice to get through, and I think that speed is something that they've clearly been concerned about in how they've done this. So your blast weapon can't shoot into combat. Because actually you would run the risk of killing yourself if you're firing munitions of that nature, that shorter range. There is some kind of fluff in there. It's a bit like Plague Burst Crawlers, isn't it, where they've got minimum 12-inch distance, that kind of thing. But yeah, so the way I'm reading it here, and actually people are saying it's confusing, I don't think it is. I think you have a blast weapon, and it has a minimum of 3 shots. So let's say the rapid-fire battle cannon on a knight is a blast weapon. You've got 2d6 shots, and if you're shooting at 6 to 10 models, your minimum is 3. So if you roll a double 1, you're getting a bonus shot,
which is good.
It's something, I suppose, but it's not there to kill squads of 10.
No.
If you're shooting a squad of 20, you've got 12 shots, or I'm trying to think about just big squads, Plague Bear, whatever it might be, cultists. So I think we're not going to see many of those. And Orcs, we'll have a talk about Orcs when we get to the combat phase. Again, I don't think we're going to see big blobs of 30 Orcs. I just don't think it. I think it's going to be such a cognitive load to deal with the movement of and survival and predicting how many you can afford to commit on the edge of coherency. It's really tricky. I think it's going to be really tough on the old brain. And we look at a Wyvern. Let's say a Wyvern is a blast weapon. I'm guessing that it will be. You've got minimum 3 shots, but you roll 46 shots. So it's not always, I think is it 46, 43? I think it's 46. It's a lot of shots. So your minimum shots is not even as high as your realistic minimum. So we can see that GW are trying to move this into an MSU.
So this is interesting,
game.
Right? So I've been thinking about this today.
Yeah.
So if everyone's going for the mindset of Horde is dead, if you go to a tournament and everyone's all now going with small arms fire, opposed to the blast weapons, thinking that, oh, well, I'm not going to be facing that because that's not going to be the thing. If you turn up with a Horde, you kind of got like,
well,
hey!
That depends on how big the blast weapon list is, because we know that frag grenades are blast weapons. We know that
grenades are blast weapons as well. Yeah.
Yeah, we know because they're not blast weapons. They have the blast special.
Where?
Special. It's not a
but
keyword.
We don't know.
I don't know what it's called, but I think it's like a
special ammunition
or something. There's some. It's going to be an extra characteristic in the in the stat line of the weapon. It's not going to be a blast weapon. It'll be a heavy weapon that has the blast special rule.
So we don't know exactly what it is yet.
Yeah,
but
we don't know quite how it's going to work. But that's what the community page has sort of suggested.
Interesting.
So and if it's everything that had blast templates apart from flamers, that's a lot of guns. You know, going back to my old plasma bomb, are they going to be blast weapons?
Yes, there's quite a lot.
At which point, plasma destroyers are a bit gross. Well, they're a bit gross anyway, but they're even more gross. Although arguably too slow. I'm sort of modifying my position on breaches a little bit, thinking about the requirement to move. I think you need to run, and also the impact of blast weaponry. I wonder whether some backfield objective holder breaches with some. I don't know. We'll see. I think those AdMech transports are amazing because they give you the movement, but they're also got the survivability.
Yeah, sure.
You know, I don't know how much
it's
impulses
interesting.
are going to be, but I can only imagine they're going to go up because they are really good. Because they give you the movement and the survivability. Yeah. So we'll have to see. So yeah, that's it really for the weapons part. We've got the blast weapons. There's then some stuff around making attacks, inflicting damage. And this I think is important to bring up because there's an important distinction here that ties in with what we were talking about earlier about the fact that a dice roll cannot be modified to lower than 1.
Yes.
So we've got the usual hit roll and we've got re-rolls before modifiers. We've got the wound roll, which works exactly the same way that it's always worked. Once the wound roll has gone through, the player commanding the target unit picks which model is being hit, and if the model's already taken a wound, that takes the wound. So again, exactly the same. But the saving throw, and this is something I think a lot of people sort of don't play this way, and it's an important distinction. It says you roll a d6 and you modify by the attack's AP for your armor save. So if I roll a 2 for my armor save, and it's a -3 weapon, it's a las cannon, that 2 becomes a 1. Okay, so that's a 1. You can't go less than a 1. And then I compare that 1 to my armor save, which on my Terminator is a 2-up. So the Terminator takes damage and we roll a damage roll, and on a 2-up it's dead. If I can get my Terminator save to a 1+, then I compare the 1 that we've rolled with my armor save of 1, and I pass the save. Because it's an unmodified 1.
Yeah,
and that's
sure.
That's the impact of this, of the way this is worded around the fact that you modify a dice roll, and earlier on in the rules pack it says you modify a dice roll down to a minimum of 1. So it only becomes viable if there is a way of getting a 1+ save characteristic. Now, there are some psychic powers that bust saves. There are some Space Marine legions that have the ability to add to saving throws. So there are probably ways of getting to a technical 1+ save, and this exists in Sigmar, interestingly. And in Sigmar, they FAQ'd it to confirm that you can't modify to less than a 1, and that you can have a 1+ save. So that's.
But wounds carry over.
Wounds carry over in Sigmar, so it's a different. You can't make that your barometer. But again, rules as written, if you have an ability to get to a 1+ save, you basically have a 2+ invuln.
That's just like
rules as intended. I don't know. I actually don't know what the intention is because not much has a 2+ save. You know, most of the stuff that's on a 2+ is modified to a 2+, which you're not.
God, I'm just thinking orc-wise now. My I think I could get the orcs to.
Well, don't forget this happened at the beginning of 8th with Meganobs.
Yes.
So it's basically the same scenario again. And last time round, GW went nah, and stopped that dead. So I think we should assume that they'll do the same.
Yeah.
But let's keep our eye on it. Because I've got 10 Thunderhammer Terminators that really like the idea of it.
That's fine. I've got loads of Meganobs.
Yeah, absolutely. But this is the thing, you know. Let's
see who wins.
Let's see how this goes. And of course, it's not going to work in combat because you're +1 to the save that's presumably coming from some form of cover or something like that.
Now.
Well, it depends. Yeah, because is it +1 to your save characteristic, or +1 to your roll? There's a lot of navigation to be done here. Yeah. So I just think we've got to wait and see what happens.
Because like one of the things they did put up on the I can't remember. I saw it was on the community page about the terrain, and terrain has different stats. So like heavy
keywords.
terrain will give you +1. So
yeah, dense gives you -1 to hit, but something can be heavy and dense, so you can have multiple keywords on the same terrain.
yes,
So I think that actually is going to be really exciting, and not something that's covered in these rules, and something that's just going to take a bit of time to get used to. I'm sure, given 3 or 4 games, it's suddenly going to feel very natural. And I don't know whether tournament organisers will put a sheet of paper next to your table saying this terrain has this terrain has this, to give you the keywords, so that you're not arguing about it. Interestingly, they say for every sort of 12-inch block of, so for each sort of 12-inch square of table, you should have a piece of terrain.
that's interesting.
So they put that into the rules. That's in these rules here, which is quite interesting. But yeah, I think I do find it interesting that sort of if you roll in the past, I think if you rolled a 4 and it was or you rolled a 3 and it was -4, then you would say that you've got -1. But you can never go below 1 because you're not modifying your save characteristic, you're modifying the dice rolled for the save.
Yes.
So let's just see what happens there. There's various bits of interesting chit-chat across the 40k community at the moment who love to try and break a rule around why this may or may not be impactful. So, but we're not here to speculate on. I think it's really important. And I think everyone should really focus on this. Focus on the rules that we've been given.
Yes, I agree.
We've seen it already. GW did this with the morale phase announcement. Where they announced about morale and then they announced about coherency, and everyone was going, "This is ridiculous." Games Workshop have missed their opportunity, and then 3 hours later, they brought out the second set of coherency rules that basically told you your army just dies. And it was so funny to see so many people so upset, and then realise, actually, hang on a second, why was I getting so upset when I didn't have all the knowledge? So
Yeah.
I
saw loads of little videos with someone lining up the coherency and then like doing that, and then all of a sudden, then someone else put another video out, like 3 hours later, this is what happens.
You kill one guardsman, and that squad of 10 is a squad of 5. So all of a sudden, 5 intercessors in rapid fire range, on average, are killing 25 guardsmen, which is fun. Anyway, so yeah, that's it really. Ignoring wounds, you can only use one method for ignoring wounds. Invulnerable saves, you can use it instead of your normal save should you wish.
Yes.
And there may be scenarios where your invuln save ends up being worse than your armor save around this modifying a dice roll situation. It's a very specific one. If you can get to a 1+, then your invuln becomes irrelevant because your invuln saves on a 3 or a 4 or a 5 or whatever it might be. But if you've got a 1-up save, it gets interesting. It then talks about the charge phase. The charge phase is effectively the same. You pick a unit to charge with that's within 12 inches of a target. You roll your 2d6 inches and you charge. And if you can fall in engagement range, you're in. And we know that engagement range is within an inch horizontally or 5 inches vertically.
Yes.
So if you don't get enough charge range to get upper floor, but you can get underneath, you've then got a 3-inch pile-in which can take you upper floor.
Yes.
To get you within an inch to fight. So as long as you're within 5 vertical or 3 horizontal, you're in combat. So not much has changed there, apart from this definition of what's happening with the 5-inch. The next sort of big rule change, I think this is a big rule change. And actually I think it's a big rule change in the competitive scene and maybe not so much in the more narrative sort of fun gaming scene. Although maybe I'm overstating that a bit. But people tend to use heroic intervention very carefully, and you manipulate situations, because if a unit charges into you, and you can heroically intervene into that unit that's charged into you, you get to punch it for free.
Yes.
If you're not declared as a charge. So if you can engineer a situation where you can heroically intervene into a squad that has charged, you get to hit it for free. Not anymore.
And that's big.
If you heroically intervene, you become a viable target for a unit that has charged, even if you were not nominated as the charged unit that turn. So at that point, you're weighing it up. Can I tank the attacks coming in? Or actually, would I rather lose the character than the squad? Your opponent's thinking, actually, do I want to kill this character? You've got secondaries in play. Who knows what you want to... It's interesting.
It's very interesting.
And again, to perform a heroic intervention, you need to be in engagement range. So 3 inches horizontal, 5 inches vertical. So you've still got that 5-inch vertical in there. Again, we need to remember that when you're doing this, you need to move closer to the nearest model. And again, just something that people forget is that you don't have to end in engage. You don't have to end up in engagement range. You can't heroically intervene if you are in engagement range. So actually, if you stand underneath a character who's on a ruin, that character can't heroically intervene because they're in engagement range.
Right, okay.
But they can still hit you. And if you didn't declare the charge, then you're just giving them a free combat phase. So it doesn't really matter. But it's just an interesting quirk of the rule. But yeah, you can move on to an objective. As long as you move 0.5 millimeter closer to the closest unit, you can use heroic intervention to get a hold more.
Yeah.
Or hold 3. Again, the mission that we saw on the community page, there were 3 different conditions, which was like hold an objective, hold multiple objectives, and hold 2 or hold 3 or something. There were 3 different states for which each one of those tasks would gain you your 15 victory points to get you to your 45 total. And it might be that heroic intervention is the thing that gets you your toughest primary.
Okay, that sounds
so
interesting.
You can use, and you've always been able to do that, and that surprises people sometimes. I find that if I'm in a tournament and perhaps playing against somebody, it's their first tournament, something like that, they have no idea that you can heroic intervene not into combat. It's just 3 inches of movement, or 6 if you're a space wolf.
I always thought,
or a knight gallant.
See, I'll be honest. I always thought that it had to be to the enemy.
You have to move closer to the enemy, but you don't have to end up in combat.
Yeah,
so if you can get onto an objective whilst also moving close to the nearest unit, go for it. Done it so many times in Knights. So many times. And now, as I say, there is an Engine War. No one's really talking about the Knight strats in Engine War. They're worth a look. They're good. But you can make 6-inch heroic intervention a thing. On a gallant.
That's naughty, isn't it?
It's a little cheeky.
That is. Just don't tell Captain Whack.
Yeah. It's good, yeah. So, models, can freely move over terrain. As we know, you can't charge through terrain. We know that much. You have to charge around it. When you fly, you can't charge through terrain. You have to go around it. But you can go over models. Overwatch, it says here, certain rules enable units to fire Overwatch. We know that rule is a 1 CP strat that can be used once per phase. Unless you're Tau, at which point, knock yourself out. Because it's all you've got. And I think people need to be less salty about that. Because I just think that is the Tau thing.
It's always been the Tau
actually,
thing.
like crisis suits with the extra -1 AP that they also get in combat can be kind of interesting. At least do something. So that's all your charge phase stuff. Fight phase wise, if you've got a weapon, you've got to use it. So no more trying to keep something alive by hitting it with fists when you've got a weapon. Charging units fight first. But once charging units have gone, your opponent fights first when we alternate.
See, that's different, and that's big.
It's massive. So if you charge a squad in, you punch something, you kill something, you consolidate into another squad, trap that squad in combat, your opponent doesn't choose to spend the CP to fall back, because you can fall back from being trapped. That's been announced on the community page. There's a strat for that. It's quite expensive, 2 CP, I think. But if you choose not to fall back, you know that your squad is punching their squad first. Because in the opponent's turn, you hit first. Charging units still overtake. And actually, this is good because it actually starts to make sense of those warlord traits, like on Mephiston, where Mephiston has his warlord trait is to fight first.
Yes.
All of a sudden, that has value. Because in your turn, if he's already in combat, it means he always goes first. Because he goes first in your turn, because in their turn, because he does it anyway. But you have to choose him to do it. And then in the next turn, he goes first. So
it's kind of like they might have written the rules for that intention.
Yeah, and Sigmar works that way, from my understanding. I don't play Sigmar, but that's how it works, allegedly. So that's a change in terms of the fighting order. The other really big change, if you've got a single model, Demon Prince, he's whirling around, he's fighting, he's an inch away from the thing he's punching. He punches that thing, he kills it.
Yeah.
If you've got guardsmen, in the past, you could have 3 ranks of guardsmen fighting, because you'd have a guardsman within an inch, and then 2 guardsmen within an inch of that unit that was within an inch, because the bases are so small.
Yeah.
This rule has been completely rewritten, and I think it's really good rule. I think it's really good rule writing, this. So now, a model can fight if it's in engagement range. So if it's within an inch, it can fight. If you want a second rank to fight, the second rank has to be within half an inch of the first rank, and the first rank has to be within half an inch of the unit that you're fighting. So single models can be within an inch and do their thing, but if you want to have multiple ranks, they've got to get really close.
Yeah, sure.
So, and I think that's a really good addition to me. That idea of, Tyranids, that kind of idea of this kind of horde of Tyranids all falling over each other to get into combat, versus a great unclean one swinging his bell. It's like to me that's cinematic. It makes sense, but also it changes the way the gameplay works, because it means you have to get close to have 2 ranks. It means that if you're fighting someone upstairs, because you're in engagement range, you're within 5 inches, your friend can't hit that person because they're not within 5 inches. So the only way you can get multiple ranks is to be really close, but a significant single model or a character unit that's underneath another character unit can fight at full efficiency. So to me, that's good rules. That's good rules, because it makes Horde do what Horde should do. It makes big, powerful models do what powerful models should do. And it means you can't hide from a demon prince by standing upstairs, for example. So, great rules. Great rules, I think. But a really important distinction, and I think that's one that people might take a while to sink in, this idea that you can fight if you're in engagement range, but if you want to do multiple ranks of fighting, the first rank has to be within half an inch, and the second rank has to be in half an inch of that. And if you're on tiny bases like guardsmen, bloodletters, you never get more than 2 ranks. So you can never have more than 2 ranks fighting. And then everything else works very similarly. There's nothing really there. Your pile-in is 3 inches towards the nearest. Your consolidate is 3 inches towards the nearest. And even if you don't move, you're considered to have piled in, just from a keywords perspective. So you've done all your fighting. You then move into the morale phase. And again, this has been on the community page already. So you take your morale test, same way you always have done. So you've got your D6 plus the number of models destroyed. And if that number is higher than leadership, you fail the test. Now, in the past, if you failed the test, you lost the number that you failed it by. Now you lose 1 model.
It's good.
Having lost that model, you then move into combat attrition test.
And now this is
With
new.
the combat attrition test, you roll a d6 for each remaining model in the unit, and on a 1, the model flees. Or 1 model flees for each 1 that you roll. Now, if the unit's at half strength or under, on a 1 or a 2.
Is that half strength from when they started at the beginning, or is
from
this...
the starting strength of the unit?
Okay. That's
so
massive.
half strength is defined. Do you remember I said at the beginning there's these core definitions, and two of the things that are there are starting strength, half strength. So starting strength and half strength are defined at the very beginning of the game based on your starting squad strength. So if you've got 10 in the squad, half is 5. 20, 10. So you can see that actually you start to lose models much more quickly once you've lost half the squad.
Yes.
And we round up. So again, we start to see how 5-man squads are looking really good in this edition.
So that's interesting, because obviously with orcs you have that ability of you basically take D3 more wounds.
Yeah.
Instead of
absolutely.
So I wonder if that how that will.
Because you've got to fail the leadership test first, though. So don't forget that you can have leadership 1,000,000 as an orc, basically.
Yes.
You can choose a leadership between 1 and 60, can't you? Often in traditional 8th meta. If you're trapped and you want to fall back, you can just choose to have a leadership of 1, because you can take your leadership from the 1 character.
That's it.
And then basically auto fail to then pull yourself out of being trapped in order to then charge. And it's worth losing 3 models to gain charge. But there's all that kind of jankiness. That kind of goes away, because now it's just a pass fail on the leadership test. Of course, a commissar becomes potentially useful, because you can sacrifice a guardsman to retake a leadership test. And the sacrificed guardsman does not count against your models lost. So perhaps commissars might become vaguely useful again. I don't know. But yeah, that's the combat attrition test. And then comes the kicker, the one that was So everyone was getting really angry about this, going, oh, we've got this, you can beat the system by having the bow tie arrangement where I have my line of guardsmen with 2 guardsmen on each end. My bow tie arrangement, as I see it called. And so they've really messed up with this. But then we get unit coherency checks. So for a unit of 5 or less models, every model has to be within 2 inches of another model.
Yes.
So interestingly, the last model dies. Which is interesting. I guess a single model can't begin coherency, which is interesting. I guess things like lone wolfing space walls get rid of that problem. I mean, the Space Marine's not going to fail the leadership test anyway, but they are technically out of coherency at that point. So that might need a little. I need to check back on the top page actually to see if there is if a single model is allowed to survive. I would hope that they are.
Yeah, because then that will kind of be a bit crazy, right?
Yeah, it would. Let me just check. I'll go back to the top page.
Or unless it's designed to speed up the game.
Yeah, unit coherency. Let's have a look. All models must be within 2 inches. At least 2 other models from the unit. Yeah, it looks to me that you can't have 1 model left. So again, that perhaps needs.
Or maybe, Andy, that they've done it
that
for
needs
that.
a look.
That's
maybe that's
reason.
the plan. Maybe they don't want single models. But as I say, that gets interesting when you've got a lone wolf, where you spent the CP to make him a character and send them off.
Maybe that will break maybe that'll break that away from it.
It would be nice. It'd be nice to get a little clarification on that one. Is because it can 1 model that's left in a unit be considered to be coherent with itself?
Yes.
Who knows? That'll be an interesting one.
Again, maybe we'll see something in the next day or two with
something
regards
might
to that.
come out around that one. I don't know whether anyone's even flagged that as being a problem. 6 or more models, you've got to be within 2 inches. So if you've got that bow tie arrangement, you lose 1 model from the squad. Until you've got 5 left, you're out of coherency. So by losing 1, you lose 5.
Yeah,
but
and then
if it's a 10-man screen, honestly, like 5 guardsmen surviving as a screen is a win. So I still think your opponent's going to want to kill all your guardsmen. So
yeah.
I think you'd probably still string them out if you're setting up a 10-man guard screen. If you want them to stay alive, or if it's a tanky unit, there are arrangements you can do, but I think 2 ranks is just the best way to do it. And you know what? You might as well stick them in movement trays because it makes life easier. All of a sudden, movement trays become really useful because you've got 2 ranks.
Or do you know, I've already got loads of movement trays, so I'm already laughing.
Oh, yeah. There's an orc player, movement trays, who'd have thought? But
I know,
this is
right?
This is where this gets interesting for me. So you've got orcs. You've got 30 orcs. You've gone into combat. You punch. You kill lots of stuff. But actually, if you punch things like Space Marines, you bounce off quite a bit. Space Marines punch you back. They actually do a lot of damage. It's going to be really, really hard for you to pull models from that blob to retain coherency for that blob, whilst at the same time maximise the number of attacks from that blob. Because you've got to stay in coherency at the end of your charge. You can't charge out of coherency. You're
right.
always going to have to keep that rank of 2 deep. But then you're going to have to think very carefully about how you pull models from it. So you're going to have to pull in triangles to keep these 2-inch relationships. Otherwise, you're going to lose half the blob to the Space Marines and the other half to being out of coherency because you couldn't pull them in a way that left you in coherency. And this is another reason, and just the sheer cognitive load of dealing with that, I think is another reason why we're going to see some Horde Tyrannid lists be quite tricky to play. I think there's some really good ways to play Tyranids using the more elite units.
Well, it's going to kill Gene Stealers, the Gene Stealer cult off massively.
Well, yeah, because actually, I mean, Aberrants would be quite good because they're quite tough, they're quite tanky, but they're so expensive.
But even those, if you've got to keep them within 3, then all of a sudden, we've already just seen that as soon as you get down to like 2 of them,
yeah,
then
you just have to pull from the end of the line. That's what you have to do, and then you have to be, as long as you're 2 deep, you can pull this way. But with 30 boys, that's really you can't get them all into combat, and then they're not efficient enough.
No.
So I just think blobs of 30 are done. Is my guess. I think they're done, and I think.
Or maybe you go with the blob of 30 because then that makes your starting number half it up to 15 opposed to 10. So it makes it a little bit more
It makes you a little bit
survivability.
less morale susceptible, but you just die to coherency. For me, coherency is the issue. The
Yeah,
issue
but like
is you get punched back in combat. That
I
I
think
think is where you've got a problem, because you're not going to be able to use enough of your attacks, because you're going to need to be 3 deep to protect your coherency, which means your third row.
Yeah, but I
isn't
never
fighting.
played Andy. But I never played 3 deep. I always played it because my orcs always been on the smaller base.
Yeah,
I've always
which
played
is
them
now
as in
against
like,
the rules.
but I've always played them as they were on the bigger base. So
Yes, absolutely.
even though I could get 3
No,
orcs,
but
3 rows
what I'm
in.
saying about being 3 deep is you need to be 3 deep so that you can pull up when you get punched back, you can take away the third row to protect the front 2.
Sure.
So if you pull the front row, then the whole back row are out of coherency, and your blob of 30 is 5 instantly. It's going to require care if you want to run large numbers of units. It's going to require care in the way that you pull casualties to maintain coherency, in the charge.
I think
I
long
think
as
it's.
I think
I
long as you
almost feel like
think
it'd be good
about
to play it out, but I think it's tricky.
yeah, I think long as you plan it right. You're right. They are going to be a little bit more trickier to play, but at the moment, I'm not seeing it being that much of a problem.
Yeah, I think it's tough. I think it's tougher than you think.
I think what I'll try to do over the
Because
weekend.
the other thing is, I think they're going to get blasted off the table by blast weapons.
Yeah.
Because so many weapons are also blast weapons.
We'll see. Look, we'll get a test game in over the weekend with one of the lads and just see how it plays out. And I think it's
10 boys in trucks. Knobs might get interesting.
Yeah. Look, Mega Knobs, I think is definitely going to be the way.
Mega Knobs are interesting.
The way for me on this. But
yeah, vehicles are interesting. The planes are interesting. Killer cans are quite good fun. They're an amazing speed bump.
Look,
what a great screening unit killer cans are. It's like there's a lot to be.
The unit explored. I'm looking to take is Gazgol.
Well, yeah.
This is all I'm
likes
interested.
A bit of infantry, though, doesn't he? He likes a bit of infantry around him.
Yep. So I'm Gazgol, and Gazgol is coming on the battlefield. So far as I'm concerned, if Gazgol comes in, you can't kill him in one phase.
Yeah, he's a beast.
So he's got.
Even Ragnar can't kill him.
Nope. It'd be like, take my head now, mofo.
That's the funny thing, isn't it? Actually, if you play that box set, the wolves against the orcs, there is not a way to kill Gazgol.
Well, no, because the box set, Gazgol loses his head before the box set.
No, I mean the one that recently came out. With,
with 100%.
Ragnar and Gazgol in it. If you play that off as a game, the contents against each other, you can't actually kill Gazgol. It's brilliant.
Nope. And that's how it should always be.
And that's how it should always be.
Yep.
So there's one last thing I think that we need to talk about. I think we've covered pretty much everything in pretty much a lot of detail. But one thing that I wanted to bring up, because I think it's interesting, is objective markers.
Yes.
So objective markers are now, to hold an objective, you have to be within engagement range of it. So again, we see this engagement range come back again. We're talking 3 inches horizontally and 5 inches vertically. Great. Lovely. So again, it means that if an objective is upstairs, you can hold it from underneath. So it gets rid of that, because that was always gamey and annoying. Now, it actually goes as far as defining what an objective marker is. Aircraft can't hold them, by the way. Neither can fortifications.
Good.
So an objective marker is a 40mm round marker. So we now have a defined size. It's like a Terminator base. Is the defined size of a marker. And we also know that you measure from the closest edge of the marker. So not from the centre, but from the edge, because again, it gets real fussy, doesn't it? So if you've got those neoprene markers, you need to make sure that there's a 40mm circle in the middle, because you need to measure your 5mm for height. And that the 3-inch circle then goes out from the 40mm, and again, with metric imperial mixing here like crazy. So you've got your 40mm circle, then you've got 3 inches out from that. And that is how an objective now works. OBSEC works the same way it always has. And after that, there's basically a mission that's what to me looks like a my first mission type sort of thing. Here's the centre of the battlefield. Here's the deployment zones. Go and scrap. And the
that's all we're going to be playing over the weekend.
Yeah, it's a really, really, really basic mission. Yeah, because you can't even really play the one that they've announced because the secondaries aren't all in there. So, you've either got to play an ITC mission or just have fun.
I think it's going to be a case of just have a little bit of fun.
Have a bit of fun and just test these rules out and get some combat on the go and that kind of stuff. But yeah, that's it really. I think that covers where we've got changes, where we've got adaptations. I think that really covers that off. And again, we've got some good clarifications in there, some things that have been talked about before. I remember seeing an argument at a tournament where somebody said, "Well, I'm in range of this model and I can see this model," and so that's fine. You know, there's always been loopholes and questions about how this works that GW have had to FAQ. We found three things. I think we found that I would be looking for some clarification on. One is, can a Psyker cast Smite multiple times?
Yes.
Which probably needs which I don't think is the intention. One is, can you get to a 1+ save through, and that has to be through statistic manipulation. So the manipulation of your saving throw. Can you manipulate a saving throw to be a 1-up? If so, that becomes interesting with the units with a 2-up save. Now that we know that we modified the dice roll and not the armor value.
See, that's the bit that I got to admit,
just needs a bit of clarification.
I prefer the other way.
Yeah, well, it's very, very clear. It's very, very clear in these rules. It's rules as written and intended that you modify the dice roll, and the lowest that you can never modify to a negative number. The question is, can you have a 1+ save? If the answer is yes, then 2-up inbound terminators are going to be a real thing at some point.
That's going to be a deadly thing.
It's going to be a thing. It's going to be interesting.
Guess you just painted the Grey Knight army.
Yeah, absolutely. And has all the Thunderhammer Salamander Terminators.
Don't worry, mate. I'll smite you before you even get to me.
Yeah, well, smite's the answer to that, isn't it? Yeah. I've got a 6-up feel no pain. It's not going to help with your 15 smites.
Bro, like, yeah, bring it. I got smite. I got shooting.
Yeah, that's all right. I'm just going to soup in some Sisters of Battle.
They ain't going to do you nothing, Andy.
They're going to sit in front and you're not going to be able to smite them. Or a Calexis. And actually, Assassins have got interesting in. The other thing I think that needs a little clarification is whether a single model automatically passes its
morale.
Coherency.
Yes.
Not the morale. It's not the morale. Not an issue. This is around coherency.
Yeah.
Does a single model remain coherent? I think that's the three questions. And literally, I mean, I've been looking at these rules all day, and we've seen various people chatting about various things on various forums. The multiple smite one I've seen come up. The coherency one is not something I've seen anyone sort of question. But yeah, as a unit of one.
Start the conversation today, then, Andy. Put it on the Twisted Dice group, and then
get it on there. Let's get it on the
get
Twisted
it on there.
Dice.
Get it on there.
Let's do that. Let's get it on the
Facebook
Facebook
conversation.
Yeah.
Anyway, time is got the better of us.
Yep,
Believe it or not, it's like an hour and 20 minutes.
Yeah, sorry, but it's a lot to get through, isn't it?
No, and it's
pretty exhaustive.
It's massive. It's massive. Anyway, listen, thank you very much, Andy, for joining me tonight and going through this. It's been absolutely fantastic and awesome. And as always, you're always the fountain of knowledge and the man to go to. Hence why we made you team captain of Twisted Dice. Thank you ever so much, everyone that's joined us tonight and gone through these awesome times that's just come up. And if you're like us, it's Christmas Day and we're just getting through our Christmas presents, looking forward to the next 12 days and what they bring. If you haven't already, like what we've done, don't forget to hit that like and subscribe. Of course, hit the bell. That's going to keep you up notified of all the cool content that's coming out from us. And of course, we've got some awesome battle reports lined up very, very soon. And hopefully we'll catch you all again very, very soon. For me and Andy, see you later. Catch you all again soon.